So, what are we doing today? This is a little live lesson. So, the point for today is we'll go over some of the things that we did in the previous course. Today, we'll look at part one of the speaking test. We'll look at a few questions to do with it. First step would be to remember near the beginning of the course we were talking about fluency and coherence. Looking at part one of the speaking test, I'll remind you of them first, and then we'll look at some recent questions, etc. About that, we'll go from this slide, and we'll just quickly remind ourselves. So we talked about speaking part one, and it's the first part of the test. So you go into the test, you introduce yourself to the examiner if it's face-to-face, and you sit down, you tell him your name, you probably show him your ID card. He looks at it, he's got a sheet of paper, a few pages of paper with the photographs of all the candidates on it, and he checks your picture and looks at the picture he's got in his little booklet. Is it the same person? He tries to work it out. And then you start answering questions. And as I said, the first part is like a Q&A. That's what we call question and answer. I quickly ask you a question, you give me the answer. Then I ask you another question, you give me the answer. And that's part one. And as we talked about before, it's about 4 to 5 minutes in length. So he's got 3 sets of questions to ask you. The first is always about your home or hometown or about your studies. And then the rest of the topics should be familiar about you. They say this, but as we may have seen, some of the questions are a bit strange. So it's like asking you to remember a recent one. It's about keys. That seems strange. A lot of people don't have any keys. Some have why keys. So they have different kind of questions. And now we like to give long answers. I think in part one we like to give a full answer, but we don't like to talk forever because he's going to interrupt you. It's part one. In part one you're trying to show him that you're better than a 4, and maybe you're beginning making a good impression. Maybe he thinks at the beginning in part one this person's 6 or above. That's what you really want. He's thinking about this in his mind. The final decision for 6 or above comes at the end in part 3, but you want to make that impression. You want to start at a high level. And even if he thinks, oh, maybe not as good as before, he just comes down a little bit, it's not a terrible mark. You don't want to give short answers because short answers immediately say 4, and you're starting here, and you've got a lot of work to do to come back up. That was what we were talking about. But in part one, as we said, the examiner is going to ask you the exact questions in the booklet. And so I'm going to show you exact questions today, just so you can see some of them. The only other thing he can ask is why. And he can ask this because a lot of students give very short answers. And this is not what he wants. He wants you to at least say why. If not, use the C structure that we talked about by giving an example as well. So he's okay with this. He wants it to be a little bit long, so to speak. He doesn't want just a very brief answer. He doesn't want an incredibly long answer because he's got to ask you a lot of questions. But you tell him why. If you have an example, give it. That's what we talked about. But don't make him say why. If you finish the exam and he's asked you why 5 or 6 times, that was not so good. He shouldn't have to ask you this. You should keep doing the talking. So if you keep talking, he interrupts you. This is good. He's just got to ask you some more questions because he's watching his little clock, and he's being recorded also, so that if he gives you longer or he doesn't ask a particular amount of questions, he's in trouble. So that's what we talked about in this part of the course. We had looked at the C structure, where I've already mentioned that's why, saying why, and possibly given an example in part one, not a very long one, but more importantly, we said we had to join these sentences together. So that's why you say because it joins the sentence together. And why? Because then it makes your sentences longer, makes you speak a bit longer and more fluently. So that's what we looked at, and we compared some of these. So there's one of them about study. Do you think your place or your school is a good place to study? And this was not a good answer because it was full of these short sentences where we need to stick them together. And then we stuck them together like that. So very basically, we used because and for example. We learned later in the course that we can use better words, but at the very least, you've got to you've got to use these words to stick sentences together. Don't stick sentences together, it's bye-bye to your mark, you're a 4. So that's what we looked at. Here's another example that we looked at again. This one used since as this time, as meaning because. And then here we go. Quickly, we looked at this and then we changed due to the fact, which was good. As you see, we said on example. But importantly, at the end here, I made a little note, and the note was these phrases I'm not inclined to, I'm unlikely to, which mean I don't usually. So when we're answering these part 1 questions, we want to try and say, and we don't want to say I like or I don't like all the time. We want to try and say other phrases that sound like better vocabulary. And so I'm not inclined to, and I'm unlikely to. So these are good instead of, you cannot say all the time, but it helps. So that's what we looked at when we were looking just a little bit at part 1. Then I gave you homework, right? So that was what we looked at. It's a question answer, quick fire perhaps, but you always have to say why and give an example. So we'll look at the IELTS speaking part 1 here. And I'll give you a little 1 or 2 questions. You can write them or speak them if you wish. That's quite good. And think about these questions first. I'll help you after a while, but let's look at it. So first, for every type of question in part 1, you look for opportunities. So he asks you a question and you're thinking, right, so what can I show him? What can I show this examiner? You want to show the examiner something that's going to impress him and make a good impression from the very start. You don't want him thinking 4 or 5 right at the start. You want him to think at least 6. So you're thinking, I've got to keep talking. Now, what about the grammar and vocabulary? What can I use? So you're looking for opportunities to show these things. Okay, I'll move my picture here. So you want to show some joining words, as we've seen. So we know because we want to show better, right? So we want to show that when we answer. And it would be good if we could think of showing some present perfect. How could we show a sentence with present perfect? Now, often you have that opportunity when the question is present perfect. Have you ever, for example? But you can also put it into other answers, and if you can use it once well, correctly, basically, then that's good for you. That makes a good impression because a present perfect correct, when I was an examiner, if I heard it correct, I thought about at least a 6. If it was wrong, I thought a 5. So remember, 5 tries to do the good stuff correct, but gets it wrong. A 6 is the beginning of doing good grammar correctly. So you're trying to show him a good present perfect every question. Now, it's not possible in every question, but these are the things to think about. So they're testing your basic ability. Whoops, I'm trying to move me again here. They're testing your basic ability in English in part 1, but you want to show him, basic, no problem, I can do higher. So although it doesn't get you a high mark, this can contribute to your high mark because it starts you off on a high note, so to speak. So you look for opportunities in part 1. It's fairly simple, but you want to exploit, you want to use this to your advantage. And that means particularly the vocabulary and grammar. So he can't ask you his own questions. So you think, can I put any good grammar or vocabulary in? So it's, as we said, as soon as you go in, if you're face to face, you will go into the exam room all by yourself, and he'll say to you, can you tell me your full name, please? So this would not be a good start if you said, you can call me Karen, for example. You can call me Paul, or you can call me Don. This is not a good example because he did say, can you tell me your full name? So you give him your full name. In your case, it will be your full Chinese name. If it's from another country, the full name. That means first name and surname. And then maybe he'll say, what can I call you, if he wants to do that. So you could say, my full name is Jiang Wei, for example. So you just give the full real name. And then if he wants to know anything else, if he wants to call you Karen or Paul or Don, then fine, no problem. He'll ask you. Okay. You could also say, my full name is Jiang Wei, but you can call me Karen, for example. You could do that, right? It's not a test, but if you go in and you get that wrong, maybe there's going to be a problem, you know. And then they ask, can I see your identification, please? And if many times when you do it, the student says, and they don't know what identification is. So maybe you want to make sure you know what these things are first. Right. So here is part one. Question, a recent question as well. I tried to pick one or two that maybe you could show language in, but also that look a little difficult or a bit strange, or there's some strange ones. So this one is challenges. So what does this mean exactly? Let's read the questions. So he will have about 4 questions for you that he must ask. Now, he doesn't need to ask you all 4. He could ask you 2 or 3, depending on the length of your answer, right? But he's got to ask something from this topic. So, challenges. So the first one is, what subject do you think is the most challenging at school? So this is about school, right? A challenge at school, but it's not the topic's challenge. So the next one is, do you like to challenge yourself? So the first one was a do you think question. In your opinion. So think about a do you think question. How do you start or begin an answer with when you're asked, do you think? We learned some beginnings of sentences, if you remember, beginnings of answers. You don't really want to say, in my opinion, or I think all the time. So you could say something else. Let's you have a think about that. And then you talk about the challenge at school, whatever. The next 2 questions are, do you like questions? Right. So do you like to challenge yourself? So the wrong answer or not a good answer would be, yes, I like. That would be no, bye-bye to you. So you don't want to say that. How do you begin the sentence? How do you begin your answer to that one? Do you like questions? You don't want to say, I like, but you got to start with something good, maybe. Do you like to live a life that has a lot of challenges? Right? Oops. You know, a lot of challenges. So again, it's a do you like. We want to start the answer with some kind of useful or good phrase or vocabulary, whatever. And what's the last one? So the last one, how do you usually deal with challenges in daily life? So this is a regular, everyday habit or fact, this kind of question. So you see, the kind of questions you've got are not testing really difficult grammar. They're testing very basic grammar. So do you think? Do you like? And do you usually? Like a habit or a fact or everyday routine. So these are simple questions. You don't need to give the most simple answer. You can start with a good beginning sentence frame, and that's what we call them, right? A sentence frame. So let's have a see if I can get out of this. Computer acting weirdly here. Yes, right. So what subject do you think is the most challenging at school, right? So you think of a subject, challenging usually means it's a bit difficult. So if you're going to make a difficult you're going to have a difficult subject at school, you just say that one is difficult. How do you begin? Any idea how you begin your answer? What sentence frame could you do? So, do you think questions? Do you think? I better put dot. So, how do you begin that? You don't want to say, I think. No. What else? Do you think, in my opinion, is. So, these are the standard ones, and they're not very interesting and very. Everyone knows these. So, can you remember any other beginnings or sentence frames? I'll put it in here, right? Sentence frames, right? They were called sentence frames. So how do you say, oop, I'm not paying attention to my typing. Right, so how do you say I think? A better way of saying I think. Any idea of that one? What was the question again? Here we go. Having to click of it. What subject do you think is the most challenging at school? So, right. So you don't want to say I think. Any ideas? Got any ideas here? Do you remember anything from there? All right, okay. I'll give you my suggestions. So I think, right, so you want to avoid this, right? So take these away. Don't want to see this. So the one that I nearly said one of the sentence frames, the one I remember most clearly is, it seems to me that, let's see if that fits. So what subject do you think is the most challenging at school? It seems to me that, or a better one, I think some of you used this in your homework. The first subject that comes to mind is, I don't know, you could say maths, for example. You could say that. Or, yeah, the first subject, if you remember these, pops into my head is maths. So these three seem okay. This is a sentence frame, or basically means the beginning of a sentence. So do you think is the question? So how many do you thinks can you think? So for example, another one just to quickly go. Here's one. I'm typing this out now from recent questions, and you can see it's about shopping, happy things. This is a question about happy things, right? So, but you see the question is about happy things, but when you're the student, you should be thinking it's a do you think question. So do you think that means I can start? I don't want to start with, in my opinion, I want to start with some of these ones. So if you see a do you think question, let's start with one of them. So let's see what is the first thing, right? The first thing that comes to mind is, do you think people are happy when buying new things? Well, the first thing that comes to mind is, maybe it seems to me that sounds better. And then you have to put in some answer, right? So are people happy? Seems the first thing that comes to mind is that, let's see, right, all of my friends love to go shopping when they are feeling, you can say down, depressed, or sad, or something like that. Depressed is a better word. Yeah, and then if you wanted, you could go. There is a huge shopping center in my city with, see how you can just make it longer and longer, lots of clothes shops. So my friends and I go there, see, and when we buy maybe a new top or whatever, or even our mood improves, right? That's how I would quickly answer it. If I'm quickly doing it, it's that. You could, but the main thing is this sentence frame. When you say, do you think? Or you could say, it seems to me that. A lot of my friends love to go shopping when they are depressed. Now, instead of saying, if we could think of it, you could say what I mentioned earlier, are inclined to go shopping when they're feeling depressed. And then I give an example. Why is that? That must be a comma. For instance, there's a huge shopping centre in my city with lots of clothes shops. So my friends and I go there, and when we buy a top or even an accessory, our mood improves. So the most important thing here is that you started with the little expression. And you can say the same with, it seems to me that a lot of my friends are inclined to go shopping. Later, maybe it's too late, but we thought of a better word for. And the rest of it is just the C structure with an example of your friends. So as I said, the first part, you can use your friends as an example a lot of the time because it's a familiar topic. It's familiar. So you can use familiar people in your example. So that's a do you think question. And again, you can put, it seems to me that, what about pops into my head? First thing that pops into my head is that a lot of my friends are inclined to go shopping. So that's a do you think, and then you just say something, you explain it, so you give an or you give an example. So a lot of my friends are inclined to, so you're saying yes, and then you're explaining it, and then you're giving an example, right? So that's a do you think question. So we should be thinking of that. If you wanted to put present perfect in there, is there a possibility? You could say something like this, but this way, maybe. Or here's a good one. Unhappy that I want to spend some money, something like that. But it's a bit difficult to think of one, but you could stick a present perfect in there. Anyway, that's an example of the do you think question. So if number one, you've got the C structure, but secondly, try to think, do you think I have to begin the do you think questions like this? So I'll show you this one, next one for challenges. They had it, didn't they? Do you like to challenge yourself? So it's a do you like question. So how do we start one of these? So do you like questions? You could start with a present perfect. You could say, yeah, I have always. So we'll say the simple ones first. To challenge. I've forgotten the question. Was it challenge yourself? See, do you like to challenge yourself? Yes, I've always liked to challenge myself because. There you go. So even in a do you like question, you can bring in the present perfect. Like I said at the beginning, you're looking for these opportunities. Now, you could say other things. You could say, yes, oh, you could say it better. I have always been inclined to challenge myself. What? Well, we say due to the fact that this time, it's the same thing, but the words are better. What was that other expression I said earlier that I reminded us of? What was it? I'm unlikely to. Oh, right. I am not inclined. I'm unlikely to do so. Oops. So this, you could start, do you like questions with a present perfect? That was, as I said at the very beginning. Perhaps we didn't go into it in detail in the course, but it's another idea that could be used. Or you could say, if you don't like challenges, no, I have never been inclined to challenge myself. So the first one, yes, I have always liked to challenge myself because it's good, it's fine. Why? Because it's a good start because you've got present perfect. The next one, yes, I've always been inclined to challenge myself due to the fact that it's better because, yes, it's the same good start in grammar with present perfect. However, you've improved the vocabulary with inclined to. I've always been inclined to challenge myself is better than liked. So you've already impressed the examiner twice. And then instead of saying because, you say due to the fact, because that's a better vocabulary than, but it's also better cohesive devices, joining words, which is a separate mark in the descriptor. So that second one, the first one's good, the second one's better. And then it's a negative version of the second one there. Here you've got a good one as well, a very good one as well, because you've got present perfect. You've got inclined to instead of liked. You've put never, so you've done the negative, which can be sometimes a little challenging. And this time you've got as instead of, which is also showing variety in your vocabulary and joining words. So that's not even a full sentence. So the point here is if you can answer questions beginning like this, you're making a good start. Who cares what the subject is? You've made a good start just by showing grammar, cohesive devices, joining words, and vocabulary. And we've only got half a sentence. And then you show better from just showing the C structure. So you say something, you're going to explain why. If you've got time, give a little personal example is enough. And this is how to do it in part one. So that's a do you like question. So we've got do you think, looking for your opinion. And we've got do you like. Was there another one here? Just to finally go over, there was two do you likes, I remember. How do you usually deal with challenges? So they're basically testing your present simple. So what are they doing? The main part of this is how do you see? So that's a present simple question. Now, as you learn in your grammar classes at school, if you ask a present simple question, it's very straightforward. You can answer with present simple. Or you can answer with present. It doesn't need just to be simple. So could you answer with the present perfect, for example? Because we want to show, we want to impress. How do you usually deal with challenges? Well, you could say, I usually, I think this question is quite difficult just to get an idea for. How do you usually deal with? Well, you could just say, so this is the most boring way to answer. I usually deal with challenges by, listen, I'm trying to think how to. So you deal with challenges by, all right, by facing them immediately and not delaying. Something like this. So that would be an okay answer because it's a good sentence. Nothing wrong with the sentence. It asked a question with present simple and you answered with present simple. So nothing wrong, but does it make a good impression? Or are you thinking, how can I show present perfect, for example? I have always dealt with challenges by facing them. But oh, I've got a better idea. Seeing them as ways to improve myself. Goes better. So, but the point here is we have managed to put present perfect in there. So the question is, how do you usually deal with challenges? So you can answer with present. It doesn't need to be present simple. But for example, if you said this would be wrong. Oops. So that's wrong. Why? Because it's past simple, but it's past. It wasn't a past question. So if you answer in the wrong time, put it that way, then that's the mistake. But if you are asked a present question, then you can answer in present. It doesn't have to be present simple. So again, how do you usually deal with challenges? I have always dealt with challenges by, so therefore, they're testing your present simple. And in the first answer, you give them present simple and said, okay, right, he knows present simple. Well done. You should do. But if he asks you and if he's testing present simple and you give him a present perfect answer, he's saying, all right, he's better than just giving me present simple. He knows present perfect. The point being that the question is present. And have we got that yet? So as I said, when you get these part one questions, just think, is it possible to use present perfect? Obviously, if the questions were something in the past, you can't do it. And do not try to use past perfect because it's too complicated. So if the question said, how did you usually deal with challenges when you were a child? You cannot use present perfect. Why? Because it's not a present question, it's past. So that's it. So think of the present perfect. How do you put that in? So we can put it in two kinds of questions where we didn't know, maybe. Present perfect. Oops. Now what am I doing? What's the first one? Right. Present perfect could be in, was it, do you like questions? Or was that last one? Yeah, present simple question. There you go. So that's what we're thinking of. And of course, are we doing what I said? We didn't know, maybe. Present perfect. Oops. Now, what am I doing? What's the first one? Right. Present perfect could be in, was it, do you like questions? Or was that last one? Yeah, present simple question. There you go. So that's what we're thinking of. And of course, are we doing what I said earlier? Let's have a quick look to see what I said earlier in this little thing. So joining words, we try to use for every type of question, we look for opportunities to show joining words, especially ones that mean so we have to say why. So that means if we can show, imagine he asks you 5, 6 questions and you say because 5 or 6 times. It's not going to be that good. So you want to be able to vary these words. So you're looking for opportunities to say joining words and any opportunity to say present perfect. And actually, in these words, you could also put a sentence stem. It seems to me that, what about the other ones? I have always, so you can always put it in. So, for example, I'll put it in here. To me, that I usually deal with challenges. You could try to be clever and say, I have always been inclined to deal with challenges. Sounds a bit complicated for you to put together, but that's the idea. So you could say, it seems to me that I think that's probably the easiest one to put in without being too complicated sounding and destroying it. So there you go. You can get the sentence frames in as well. What's that? Anyway, so that's what you're looking for in these questions. And so you're going to get lots of questions like this, and we'll look at 1 or 2 other types questions quickly. We've got 15 minutes, so let's go. Where is the other type of question I've got here? Let's have a look. Let's go to the next one, which was asking for help. What kind of questions do you ask? So that's present simple question. Do you ask? And you could say, it seems to me that I've always asked. Why are teachers always willing to help students? It's a why question this time. So we know, I'm trying to think of a good way to start a why question. The reason for this is, you could say that. Just, you're getting new expressions here because I'm just thinking of them. Why? You could have a sentence stem like this. There's a new one for you I just came up with. So sometimes they ask you a why question. You don't want to say because or due to the fact that you could say the reason for this is that you could even sound cleverer. There we go. It's a why question. So this is what as I said, when this part 1 of the speaking test, when you're doing this, they are testing for basic English by using easier, familiar questions. And what basically they want to see, are you a 4 or better? So you don't want to show them you're just a 4. You want to show them that you're better. So these expressions then show him or her that you're better than a 4. Look at this. And then that person will then listen to more. So these are expressions you can begin with. The reason for this is that it seems to me that the reason for this is, so that's, I don't know how difficult this one is for you to say, but for me, that's really easy to say. That's very natural sounding. It seems to me that the reason for this is that, so this is what you want to do when you're looking at the part 1 questions. And we can think this way because most of these part 1 questions are fairly similar types. See if we've got any more in a moment. Looking down at the bottom here, when was the last time you asked for help? So this one is testing your past simple. So you cannot use present perfect in that, but you can still use the sentence stems. So when was the last time? Well, the last time that pops to mind into my mind is, or the first one that comes to mind is when I was a child, about 5 years old. You just use the same sentence frames. You use joining words. You can do that also. You just can't use present perfect. unless you introduce it elsewhere. Let's have another one. Childhood memory. So if it's childhood memory, you're going to get a lot. You think you're going to get a lot of present or past tense. So these two questions, past tense. So the main thing for everyone when you answer with past tense is get the endings right. So make sure I hear or the examiner hears that it's a past tense. That sound at the end of the verb. However, although it's about childhood memory, these questions here are using present tense. So what are your best childhood memories? So the childhood memories that come to mind or first come to mind are, you could say something like that. You start like that, and then you want to say because or another word for because. So we'll say as or due to the fact that, oops, missed the T. And then we want to say for instance. And it goes along like this. Remember that. So even in the childhood memories, you think, oh, this is all going to be past tense, but it's not. They ask you present questions as well. And if you notice, here we go again, that this is just present simple test here. This last question is a do you think question. They want your opinion. And so we refer to what we were talking about right at the beginning. So do you think? Well, it seems to me that the first subject that comes to mind is do you think or I'm inclined, for instance. So even in what you think is going to be about the past, the questions can become present. And then you can use that stuff again, the same words that I've mentioned already, the sentence frames, etc. So here's one where you have, this one is being used at the moment. And so it seems a little vague in the sense of exciting activities. What do you mean, exciting activities? Activities, they tend to mean physical, energetic things like bungee jumping, or, and this one's doing a scuba dive or swimming with dolphins. Even more exciting would be swimming with sharks, but I do not recommend doing that. But it's a have you ever. So this is a big opportunity to use present perfect. Have you ever tried any exciting activities? You could say, no, I've never tried an exciting, I'm a very boring person. Or, yes, I've done lots of exciting. I've been scuba diving for 5 times so far in my life. I've been bungee jumping, something like that. So this one means you can use present perfect quite a lot. I've done that, I've done that. You want to use present perfect. That's telling you he's testing you for present perfect. Can you do it? So if he's asked you other questions and then he asks you present perfect, he's testing. Are you able to get a higher mark? So recognize this. Realize, have you ever? Something like that. So what do? You want the present perfect, you want your joining words, you want to use the C structure, and it's not going to be such a long answer, but it's a good one. So there you go. But be careful, as usual, if you give an example from the past, make sure it's in past simple. Next one, it's not always the same tense. But they are testing you with the same kind of questions. Here's one. What did you think were exciting activities when you were a child? So this is very clearly testing what? Past, particularly past simple, but past tenses. So that's a past tense test. Then he comes back and uses present perfect again. So what's he doing? He's testing. The examiner is testing. Do you know the difference between present perfect and past simple? Can you show me that you know the difference? Or are you going to mess this up and get them all mixed up and wrong? So that's what these 3 questions do. I'll test your present perfect, then I'll change it a bit, test the past, and then I'll come back again and test the present perfect. See if you know the difference. That's what it's testing. And then the last question is, would you like question? but not do you like, because they test the difference between would you like and do you like. So would you like, that's possibly would you like in the future. And what do we say for would you like? Yes, I would. It seems to me that I'd. So what they want to do there is they want to hear the I'd. It seems to me that I'd. What do you want to do in the future? What would you like to do in the future? But in this question, would you like to scuba dive, try scuba diving and bungee jumping? You could say, again, you want to be clever. Would you like to try scuba diving, for example? You could say yes, and then say, I have always wanted to try scuba diving. Or, no, I have never been inclined to. I keep forgetting that other one. I keep. This is what having an old memory is like. I've never wanted to scuba dive, and I don't think I ever. What have you done here? Because you could say da da da, because, well, maybe you hate the water or you don't like swimming or whatever. But what have you done? Again, you're trying to put in present perfect. The question wasn't in present perfect, but it's an opportunity, and it's a particular opportunity because before that question, he was testing present perfect, past simple, present perfect. Do you know the difference? And then he asks you a would you like question. So you can answer in different ways, but one way would to be here's present perfect. I can use it for that as well. In my life, I've always wanted to do this. So it's a good one. Present perfect is a good tense to try and use in part one. You don't know what's going to happen in two and three, but in part one, there's simple questions about you that you can use this difficult tense. So these are the kind of questions you'll get in part one. The do you think, do you like, would you like, have you ever? And then what do? You use the sentence stems and sentence frames, you use connecting words, and you try to put in other words, for example. Choose ones you quite like and present perfect. And that can answer or be part of most of the answers in the part one. Again, you're thinking, yeah, I've got to say something to answer the question, but more importantly, you should be thinking, this is a test, and I want to show the examiner, I want to make a good early impression. So that would be how to do it. So then he's thinking, this student could be a 6 or a higher, but I'm going to ask more difficult questions later, but already he seems quite good, or she seems quite good. That's what you want. You want to get inside the examiner's head. Anyway, so that is looking a little bit more in detail of at part one in the speaking. So have you got any questions about it? Do you want to ask me any questions? Either you can ask me with your voice or ask me writing. Is there anything that you want to ask about that so far? As I said, it's a little extra to what we did already, but quite useful. So if you have, just type it if you want to just type or ask me. Or anything else that we did on the course that you think, can he explain more or show me more examples? If you think of anything like that, you can type it in and mention it to me. Because I know it during the vocabulary part in particular, there were a lot of words to learn. Although you don't need them all, there was still quite a lot. And in the grammar, if you had not done the grammar before, maybe that was a little difficult. I don't know. Anything you would like for me to explain further or give more examples of, that's fine. Since this is a little tiny bit lesson, I'll give you one last series of questions here. Look at these before we leave. Kind of simple one, really. So this is, whoops. These are different kinds of questions here. Language. What one did I not do for you? I prefer the one that has a little present simple in it. Asking for help. Again, it's a recent question in part one of the speaking test. And it's, as usual, they're vague, they're not very clear, general sounding, some of these questions. And you think, well, asking for help, what do I talk about? So here's a series of questions from part one. I'll give you this for homework. So as you look at it, just look at what are they testing. So do you ask? So that is present simple habit. So what could you do? Can you put sentence frame in? Can you put in present perfect? What joining words can you use and what example can you use? Say, why are teachers always willing? So they always do something. Again, that's present simple, regular stuff. What can you put in to your answer? It cannot be very long, but what can you put into your answer that immediately impresses for vocabulary, cohesive devices, and grammar? Okay, so this one again, do you often ask is present simple. Again, what could your answer be if you use what we did today? And then the last one is a little test. What's the test? Well, do you know the difference in use of and formation of present simple and past simple? So this last question is about past simple. So you've done the present and a quick last question to test, can you stop using the present and use the past? So I'll give you these little questions for homework. Know what I would like you to do in these questions. Sentence frames, joining words, possible present perfect when you can do it, and any other good words, example, and the C structure. Now, if you can put a lot of them in every answer, in one sentence of every answer, then it's going to be impressive, and that's part one. I don't think I've got any questions coming up. No, right. So that's for today. And as I said, if you have any questions or anything you would like me to cover, any feedback on the course, etc., please tell us. All right, so I'll see you next time. All right.